a record of it for others. All right, so I do want to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians to our meeting today and pay my respect to elders past and present and to any Aboriginal people who are joining us online. I would ask everyone to mute their microphones if you can, but otherwise I'll mute you anyway. Okay, so just wanted to remind you that the portal philosophy really aligns with the Best Start philosophy. So what we're trying to do when we're setting up the schema, for instance, is that we want to make sure that everything that we would do in an improvement science way that we set up for the entire year is actually confirmed before we put in the schema. So before we confirm the schema. So going to the demo site, which everyone should have access to as a facilitator, we'll go into the plan tab. And so you'll see here that the logic model is already in here. We're going to add a groundwork here. So the groundwork is added for each strategy of the portal. So we're going to do one now for active outreach. And you'll see here that there's the active outreach. I've got a stretch goal. So in this case, the stretch goal, all this information is taken straight from the logic model itself. So I'm just going to drop this in. And I'm not going to put in, actually, I will put in the change ID just for now. But you don't have to put in the change IDs before you actually confirm. So I'm going to create. Okay, so what you see now is we've got the logic model here.
There we go.
Just gonna mute. Shona, if you can just mute in Geelong, that'd be great. So now we've got the two groundworks that we've added that relates to the two strategies in the logic model.
I wasn't here because I was taking to Lisa Hewitt.
Sorry, so we can see that we've got the logic model sitting here. We've got the strategies that are in the logic model. Each of the groundworks relates strictly to a strategy. So what we've done here is we've put in develop outreach strategies to support the engagement of vulnerable families for the 3.5-year-old key ages and stages visit. So we need to have the strategies in, we need to have the logic model in before we can confirm the schema. Change ideas can be added at any time throughout the year. So that's it in terms of the plan tab, making sure that you've got a groundwork for each strategy. So we go to the setup tab. I think this is probably where the most well, this is where the bulk of the information is held, so it's important we get this right. So talking about the surveys, most people should be pretty familiar with this now, so I'm not going to go over it too much. Just a reminder that you can add a library, you can edit libraries, you can add new indicators. There's a whole heap of flexibility in these. You know, adding a new indicator is really easy. You just determine, you know, how you want to set it up, what question types, etc. And then you just, you know, you fill in what you want to create the indicator. You choose who it applies to, etc. I think everyone's pretty familiar with them though, so I'm not going to go over that too much. If you do have any questions about that, particularly for new facilitators, just give us a call later on around this. The other thing, I just remind everybody that it's a good idea to get in the habit of doing the survey previews because they will tell you exactly whether your surveys are looking the way that you want them to look. So external data indicators, this is an important one and I recommend that you always add them. You don't necessarily have to display them on your dashboard, but always add them as a library at the start, just because then you've got them there. If you find that there is some kind of information that's useful, then you can use that. But we'll look at that a little bit more when I start talking about the dashboard itself. So now I'm going to look at the local entry indicators, and I think this is the big one that people sort of have the most questions about, particularly around the monthly measures. So if you look at one that's already here, we can see ESK uptake. You can see that it's active. We can't modify it because it's already been used as part of the collection period. So I'm just going to go back to the schema. what we're going to do, you can add libraries. So just a reminder, there's a whole heap of different libraries that you can add. But if you were to add the MCH library, for instance, it's highly unlikely that you're going to need all of that information. So I'd really recommend that you delete whichever ones aren't relevant to you. So while you can add the library, make sure that you're sort of checking in on which questions are actually relevant to your site. Okay, so I'm going to add a new indicator now. And the one I'm going to add is for MCH 3-year-old key ages and stages checks. So it's important to make sure that it's active. This is in terms of the placing after, that's just where you want it to go. We'll put it down the bottom of the list. But because we want this to be a monthly measure, we're going to put it in as per month. So in terms of the header, oops, I'm going to make this 3.5, yeah, key ages and stages. We're going to put in 2 rows. I'm going to put target and actual. Let's see if I can type that correctly. This is going to be by month. We're only going to do 1 column here. So when you're thinking about how you're going to set this up, think about if it was in an Excel spreadsheet, how many rows and columns you would have, because that's effectively what you're doing now. So I'm going to put in month and then click on create. So this is now being created as an indicator. It's really easy to create it, but you can't really see what it's going to look like until you put the data in, which is a little bit of a limitation, I think, of the way that this works, but unfortunately that's how it goes. So I recommend that you probably set it up in an Excel spreadsheet just to make sure it looks the way that you want it to, if you have any challenges around setting that up. So now it's sitting in there as a monthly measure, and we'll be able to enter the data into that when we need. So I'm just going to make sure. Okay, the other thing that you can do is you can edit an indicator. So you can see here we've got the AEDC compare years indicator, which I think is a really helpful indicator, and that is one of the ones that's sitting in the library. So we can't edit this one currently, which is probably not very helpful actually to show. I couldn't edit it earlier, but I confirmed the schema this morning as part of this process. So I'll go back to the schema and I'll show you how you edit this one here. So theoretically, if you just wanted to change it to having 3 rows, you could do that, and then you just enter in your targets, your labels. But once you've confirmed your schema, it will be locked in and you will get that message similar to what you saw previously. Okay, so that's the setting up of the local entry indicators. Does anybody have any questions in relation to that yet? Because this is like the setting up part is probably the easier part, but just want to make sure that everyone's on board with that. Were there any questions around that? Okay, I'm going to keep going then. So the next one is the dashboard layouts that I wanted to show. I'm going to just switch sites here. Go to the demo DET one again. You should all have some access to this one. I want to go down to this dashboard layouts section. Obviously, you can add a layout at any time. And once you've added it, it will sit here in this section. If you click on the setup tab, it's really important. One of the big things that we have is people not being able to see a particular dashboard layout. As you can see, this available to view is not currently checked. So I will check that. I'm not going to use this particular one as the default, but I have checked it as available to view, so that what would then happen is you'll have a drop-down menu on the dashboard screen, and that'll allow you to see this particular dashboard layout. All right, so I'm going to include, you can see that 4 of these are already checked, but I actually want to include all of the external data indicators. So these are default with the ticks, and I would just leave them as that unless you have any particular reason to change that. And then we click on OK. And so what you can see now is we've got an external data layout that is available because we made it available. It's not the default. So this test one will still be the default. It's got 6 indicators. None of them are family or service surveys. It's only external data. And just a reminder that that external data is information that I put in centrally. So it's not stuff that you actually have to add to the portal yourselves. So if you go into the design, this is where sort of the fun happens, I guess, because this is where the dashboard layouts are either make or break. It's where you determine how useful they are to the people at your site. So I'm going to delete this header, and as you can see, that's just now. You can also drag and drop if I decide that AEL enrolments, because we're using live data currently. You can just see here, you can switch between live and demo data. Demo data will have a whole heap of information that you could potentially, so you can chart your graphs before you actually know what your data is going to look like. But I always recommend going back in once you do have data in the system to your live data, so then you can make it really meaningful for your local context. So we're going to modify one here around, using the live data. I'm just going to, 2 seconds. All right, we're going to look at the Kinder vulnerability indicator. Now this particular, with the demo site, there's actually 2 LGAs that are set up in here. So most people won't have 2 LGAs, but this is, I guess the process I'm about to go through will show you what you can do at your local site. So effectively, you can mess around with the chart types, and this is actually what I recommend doing. I recommend that you just have it play using particularly the live data to see what's meaningful. So here you can't change the time periods, but you can have a look. This is what a bar chart looks like. Do we want a bar chart? Maybe we want a column chart. I like column charts, so I'm mostly going to play in this space just at the moment. But if I were to have a look, you can see the way that it changes, and you can completely, this is editable at any time. So really recommend that you just work out what works for you best. So you can see here that the time periods are combined together. We've separated along the axis between the 2 LGAs. If I were to change this to separating along the axis, you can see it automatically combines the 2 LGAs together. I could now separate that across the series. And when I look at that, it's probably a little bit more useful for me because I can see side by side whether you've got second year applications, KFS, Aboriginal kids, non-English speaking background or disability. Now this might be of use as it is, but I'm also going to show you how to set up some other ways of looking at this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up some filters. So I've still filtered by area, the first one being Ararat. I'm going to put in another filter by Manningham. And so what you can see now is you've got 2 charts with that information. So exactly the same information that we've set up here, but it's actually separated out across the chart. So it's just kind of a more useful way of looking at it if I wanted to look at an individual LGA level. And so I can see that, KFS is obviously the main vulnerability indicator in Ararat, whereas the non-English speaking background is the main vulnerability indicator in Manningham. So then the other aspects are around placing the legend beneath. So that's where it was already defaulting to there. We can also change it to put it beside. As you can see, that makes the chart a little less readable. So I can change the chart width to make it triple. So that way it's a little bit better, but I think realistically it looks better with the legend beneath. And so I might not want that to be triple now. I might only want that to be double. Colour scheme, you can play around with that as you like. There's a whole heap of different colours and they're all very pretty, I'm sure. These ones are more like the 5-point merit scale and 6-point merit. They're more relevant when you're talking about agreement scales, etc., because then they'll sort of show positive colours as you're moving, like they'll sort of move from red to green, depending on whether it's a good response or a bad response. Just play around with that in terms of working out what works for you. and then you can determine whether or not you want to show the labels. So it's great to have this separated out because the numbers were so significantly different. And so when we're talking about 471 here as opposed to they've got 0 non-English speaking background, but you can see the numbers. So even though this one here is peaking quite highly, in terms of actual numbers, it's a lot lower. So that's how you set up. Sorry, was that a question?
Yeah,
I think it was.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, Jane?
It's Jane from Ballarat.
Yep.
Just with the chart, I'm just looking at the twin filter. Would we be able to do that, say, with the AEDC data? I'm just keen to have Ballarat versus the state, to have that comparative data. Would that be possible, or?
I'm trying to think if there's a way that you could set it up. I'm going to have to take that question on notice because I don't know. I could have a play around with it and see if you can set it up like that, because that would be very, very helpful. But
that's great. If you just get back to me, that would be awesome.
I will do that.
It would be a great visual for our partnership.
Yeah, exactly. You should be able to, I think, because anyway, I'll work it out and I'll get back to you on that one.
Okay.
Kylie,
Rachel,
yeah.
Yep, thanks. So this is quite exciting for me. Is there any chance for people like me who have 2 shires because currently what I have to do is have a dashboard for one and a dashboard for the other, and I don't have my data shown together. So I'd love to be able to show it like this. And you can take that on notice too. I can follow up with an email.
It's the issue is
quite clunky for me.
We separated it out, and that I think is because we separated it out to make them 2 separate dashboards, which was a historic request. But whether or not generally you want them brought together, or if you just want it brought together for this instance, I'll have to think about how we would do that. But yeah, I'll also take that one on notice as well.
Well, it's interesting because I've got. We're not as different as those 2 that you're showing, those 2 examples, but there are differences between the 2 local government areas. So it's important to be able to disaggregate the data, so it's with each of the shires, but it's really useful for us to be able to compare some as well. Yeah. Which I can't currently do.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And I mean, you could do it if you set up as local data, but that's a pain. Like, you don't want to have to do that for this sort of stuff. Like, obviously we've got external data indicators. So yeah, we'll think about how we can make that happen, because it would make a lot of sense to be able to do that. So without having to switch between sites to do it, because it just doesn't make any sense. So
yeah. Thank you.
No worries. Are there any other questions in relation to that? Because I think this is one of the more important parts of the whole dashboard process. I think this is where we really have, like, if you don't set these up right, then it becomes something that's completely useless to the partnership or yourselves or whatever. So it's just a case of going through and really experimenting with it. And if you have your own live data, once you've entered that, it makes it a lot easier to be able to do that. And, you can mess around with it, and, it can mean absolutely nothing when you change it. The type you use, for instance, this might be useful to work out percentages, for instance. In some instances it is, but generally it's probably, pie charts can be unhelpful. But that's the whole point. You can just mess around with it and work it out so that it works for your site. Really also recommend having a sort of a standard chart type. So it's probably not a good idea as a general rule, because some people aren't as good at looking at charts and reading them. It's often better just to keep that consistent chart type. So if you're talking about column charts, then keeping them as column charts or bar charts, etc. So we definitely recommend that. But yeah, just play around with it and until you find something that you think is relevant. I'm just going to go and separate this again. Actually, I'm just going to update it as it is, so just in the interest of time. But what you can see is that then that will display on the dashboard. You can see that we had that test. I can go to external data. And now you'll see this is the chart that I just set up. And, you know, obviously it's landed in a not very useful way, but that's fine. I could go back and fix that at another time. So I'm going to go back to the DET2 site again and go back into the setup tab. So we've got engaged services that you can change at any time. Family and service survey indicators you lock in at the start of the year. Local data and external data you lock in at the start of the year. Dashboard layouts you can enter at any time. So if I'm happy with the fact that I've got all of the groundworks added for each of the strategies, then, and my logic model uploaded and the indicators are all accurate, then I can confirm the schema. So that's what I'm going to do now. And so now I'm going to go into the March collect period, and you can see we've got this survey is completed. Now, if I want to be able to see this data on the dashboard, it means that I need to complete every single survey. So if this was pending, I would still have to open it, even if I didn't intend to send it out. Click on conduct and then close the survey. You have to do that for every single survey that's generated, otherwise you won't be able to finalise the process. So if I tried to finalise now, it'll say I can't because I haven't entered in that 3.5-year-old visit. Now, I know that some people have put in indicators that don't quite have the data yet. What you can do if you want to be able to display it, the rest, like the data that you do have that is meaningful for now while you're waiting for other data to come through, is that you can just enter 0 values into each of the boxes. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put in this. So we had a target earlier, I think, of 400 key ages and stages for the year. So the way that you can do this is if you were setting as a partnership, if the stretch goal was 400 for the year, then you might want to divide it by 12 and make it whatever that number is, 30 something. However, what you can do is set a yearly target. So it's up to you how you want to display it. I really like the idea of a yearly target because then you can set a line graph and you can actually see the way that you're moving toward it. So in that earlier example, the target was 400, up from 300 the previous year. So if we're talking about January, the data might have only been 15, 3.5-year key ages and stages. So I'll submit that. And January's in now. So then I do the same for February. Target's still 400. The actual, now this is where it's important that you're actually doing a cumulative figure. So if it was 15 in January and you had another 30, then it'd be 45. And then you might have another, 40 in this month. So yeah, I'll make it another 42. So I'll click on submit. So now that I have data entered into each of these, I can finalise the process, because if I went, even though I've completed all of this, if I go to the dashboard now, you'll see that there's no 2019 layout there because I haven't confirmed the data. So I'll go back to the collect tab and I will finalise this. And so I do need to see, now this, it automatically takes you to the dashboard. Now the reason there's no dashboard is because I haven't set one up. So I would need to go back into the setup tab. There is one here, but you can see it's not available to view. So when I go to setup, I'll just click on available to view and update. So now if I go back into the dashboard, for May, you can see that it's there. Okay. I didn't set this one up very well because there's no data in there for that particular site, but the layout is actually there. So if we wanted to see, for instance, that data that I just put in a meaningful way, we'll go to setup. We will add the local indicator, which was this one. We'll update. Then we'll go to design. We'll configure this to see, again, have a play around, but I like a line chart. So what we might do, see, as you can see, completely useless there. That we don't want. And so you can see here, this is where we start to get something more meaningful. So play around until it's the way that you want. See, all of these things, like none of them are obviously particularly helpful the way that they're currently displayed, but we want that. Got to remember which one the right one is. I'll have to find it and show you because this isn't it. Hang on a second. Where is the right one? Yeah, I'll have to show you exactly how to set that up. I've got a separate file for doing that and I can't actually find where it is at the minute. But again, it's sort of that example of this is how you play around until you find it. So I don't know. I'll find it after. I'll set it up for you. I'll show you how it's done. I do have a file that tells you how to set it up properly. So that's how you will look at that data. How you'll go in once you've actually got that data in the system. You'll be able to actually then see, where you're tracking against each of your deliverables. But I will show you separately. I'll send out an email with the file that has exactly how to set up these charts so they're meaningful, not like 2 dots on the pages I've currently got. So really conscious of time and wanting to get cracking, but the report tab I'm going to only briefly touch on. I think everyone knows how to add PDSAs. Just a reminder that the summary report is really important, and if we could please get people submitting those on time, that'd be fantastic. So if you don't have access to your summary report because I haven't set you up properly as a facilitator, then please let me know. The gallery tab, it's fantastic to see so much happening in this space. It's really, really great to start seeing so many things being shared. Interestingly, there's none for relationship-based practice, but yeah, that's just really interesting. And I think a lot of that is coming into cultural safety anyway at the moment, which is great, given that we're focusing in on Aboriginal children. Just wanted to highlight the importance of the About link. We want people to be able to click on the About link and get some information that just gives you a real snapshot. So when you are completing your PDSAs, if you are choosing to share them, so getting in the habit again of closing off PDSAs and approving them. Once you do that, then it's really important to be able to, if you want to share it, and that you actually click in and put some information in the About section that just gives a very brief rundown on why people might want to go into that PDSA, because as you can see, we're starting to get quite a list, which is great, and it'd just be good if people don't have to go directly into the PDSA to find out exactly what the information is within it. But you can see if you click on the view, then you can read through and work out exactly what what the learning was from each of the PDSAs. So this is a really useful adaptation to the portal, and we really encourage people to be using it because we are starting to see that it helps to promote collaborative practice a whole lot better. And then in terms of the dashboard, there's a few things. We've had people not sure as to why they couldn't see their dashboard. It's almost always because it's either not available to view or because the collection period hasn't been finalised. So if you can make sure that you do both of those things, then you should be okay. Remembering again that you can set up dashboard layouts at any time throughout the schema. And again, just to go over, I guess that the schema, the whole portal rather is set up really to reflect the way that Best Start works. So you want to lock in indicators and measures for a 12-month period, and we want to lock in our logic model for a 12-month period. But things like change ideas, they should be evolving all the time. The services that you engage should be evolving all the time, and your dashboard layouts, because the data that you're getting in may cause some challenges. Now, I do have to speak about the monthly measures, and if you've kind of tuned out and are not listening now, it's a time to really pay attention because this is complicated. And unfortunately, it's a limitation of the fact that we set up the system as a quarterly framework, and that's caused some problems with the monthly measures. So if you want to display monthly measures, you have to finalise the process, which means finalising surveys, everything basically, before you can display a month's worth of data. So what you need to do is go through the process, just remembering that you're finalising the process before it's visible on the dashboard. So choose your timing of when you want to close your surveys off, when you want to be able to display that data. But you may have to call me to definalise your survey collection so that you can go in and enter additional data as you get it a little bit later on. So I guess it's a very imperfect way of being able to display monthly measures monthly, but it's a fix that we have given the infrastructure of the system that doesn't involve a massive overhaul of the system. So it's going to just require you to put in, to make sure that you're, like when you've got the data in, if you want to display it on the dashboard for a partnership meeting, then you have to finalise the entire process. But if you do need to definalise that in order to be able to add additional data as the quarter goes on, then you have to call to definalise. So I apologise that it is imperfect, but it's the best that we've got at this point in time. So just want to make sure, does anyone have any questions on that? Because it is, I think it's tricky and not ideal, but that's sort of how the system's going to work for us. All right. I'm going to assume there's no questions. Now, I am recording this session so that if there is anything that you missed or whatever, you can go back and have a look at. Are there any other questions generally that you'd like me to cover off? We've got 7 minutes and 16 seconds remaining of our free time.
No, but Rachel, we'd just like to say thank you.
No problems.
It's really helpful. Like I said, it's really helpful in terms of, I find it not to be really that user-friendly at times, and it's really helpful to have just to go through it, particularly for us around the monthly measures, which are really important, and I really want to be able to show those. So at our partnership meeting, so just to be shown it's really simple and straightforward to actually put them in there.
Yep.
Is helpful. So thank you.
No worries at all. And I will send through, as I said, I will send through that the sheet around setting up like that key ages and stages one, for instance, just so that you can see how to display that chart properly. You know, I'm very conscious of time, so I was just trying to get out of here on time. I can see. Sorry, there's a chat. Beautiful. Thanks, Shona. All right. If that's it, have a lovely day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thank you.
What does
Bye.